with another 10,000 killings in the Northeast. So the question is international, are they with us or against us? It seems that whenever we are succeeding, they are not happy.
Absolutely.
That is my own opinion. Whenever we are succeeding, they always want to find one way or the other to deny, because they know when they accuse us of human rights abuses, most international organizations will not want, countries will not want to
sell arms.
And that's why I mentioned the first time.
It's about arms.
We're having issues getting weapons because we're
welcome,
denying
guys.
equipment. So for me, a friend in need is a friend indeed. If my friend turns his back against me when I need
these foreign NGOs are something
that's
else.
very critical, and that's one thing in Africa we must understand. And that's what I'm saying, that we must produce what we need. If we don't, we will continue to suffer.
Interaction that happened in Qatar, I think towards the beginning of the year or thereabout, he was talking about the fact that these NGOs, anytime the Nigerian army starts succeeding and pushing back the rebels, what they do is that they come up and say, oh, we're going after this, we're violating human rights. Well, these are the same NGOs and the same people that are, and you see that the United States of America imposed on us through the Leahy Law Act, meaning that the blanket ban on sales of arms to the Nigerian government, while the militants are getting weapons and attacking the soldiers. This doesn't help, it's demoralizing. And this whole idea of human rights violation against terrorists is insane. These same NGOs are the ones carrying food and weapons and whatever and supplying to them. When you speak of NGOs, and this is one of the tools that the West are using and people don't understand. They create some sense of credibility for them because they are free and at liberty to criticize their own government. So people think that these NGOs are credible. They are not. The NGOs are bleeding Nigeria. The NGOs are one of the major problems affecting us as a country. And we saw recently with the emergence of Trump as president, it was clear that USAID was actually funding, aiding and abetting terrorism in Nigeria and around the Lake Chad area. So we need to point some of these things out. This whole idea of, the Nigerian government did not do this. Oh, there's genocide against Christians. And if you look at the history of the role of the West in the Sahel of Africa, I told a story before about the role of France and America during the war in Afghanistan. What happened? They came to the Sahel of Africa and recruited thousands of African people, young men that were taken to Afghanistan to fight against the Soviet Union in the 80s. And some of them are now there, whether it's their sons and their proteges are the ones heading very radical organizations today in the Sahel. Mujao is one of them. Jenim is one of them. Al-Moghabitoun is one of them. Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. And even if you look at a group like Boko Haram, I'm going to do a quick video, course on the history of Boko Haram, the emergence of Boko Haram, and probably go to the Northeast and do a comprehensive documentary that I'll post on my Patreon. So for those of you that want to see this video, all you have to do is to go to my Patreon. The link is on my bio, and you can subscribe for $5 a month, as a way to support the channel. It's right there. You can take a look at it. And other videos that I'll also be posting during my travels around Nigeria, visiting some of these communities as well that have been affected. So yeah, so for those of you that are interested, I'd love to move around. One other area that this is happening is Plateau State, but what is happening in Plateau is somewhat different compared to what the situation we have in places like Borno, Adamawa, particularly the Northeast, because this is in proximity to Lake Chad. The Lake Chad area is an economic hub. The Lake Chad area have abundance of rare earth minerals. And, gallium, things like rare earth minerals for defense industry, rare earth minerals, that is essential for Western tech and so on and so forth, is in the Lake Chad area. So it's not a surprise to me that we are facing the same situation. If it is not the Boko Haram and terrorism in Nigeria, if you go to Congo, it's the rebels. If you go to Central Africa, it is the what do you call them? It's the Seleka against the Anti-Balaka. If you go to Chad, it's the same thing. So who on earth is encouraging this and funneling arms into Africa for us to bleed each other for their own benefit? These are some of the questions we need to ask each other. So just coming out and blatantly accusing the Nigerian government. So they, like I said, during a military forum, a political military forum in Qatar, the chief of defense staff stated clearly, the NGOs clearly refusing oversight function. These guys come to the northeast and they say they are neutral, and they go to the communities where these terrorists are living and take trucks there that they are giving them food and aid, that they are neutral. This doesn't make sense, and the international media will never talk about this. The Washington Post, the New York Times, because all of them are in bed with each other. They are in cahoots. Because if you look at the structure of capitalism and what is going on in the West, you have the political elites that are in bed with the capitalists, that have economic interests, and these capital elites are the owners of giant multinationals that are not even, in sort of any allegiance to any state. They are transnational. Look at asset management firms like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street. They own most of the giant, big corporations around the world, including in media and in tech and everything. So these guys are more powerful than the state. So basically, if a president is in power, what these guys do is that, they corrupt the president, or the president, in any sense, will be doing the bidding of these guys. If you look at people like Larry Ellison, people like Elon Musk, all these guys push the leaders around. So when the government tell you they are deploying the coercive apparatus of the states outside the shores of the country because of the national interest of America, what they are telling you is not protecting the national interest of America. It is the interest of the leaders. So when they say national interest, it's about the interest of the leaders. It has nothing to do with the interest of American citizens. These guys don't really care about American citizens. It's about their own interest. And we are seeing exactly the same thing with Venezuela. So when we speak on topics like this, it's essential for us for especially those on the outside, to pay attention, because it's easy for them to run around. So this is terrorism is happening in Nigeria. The Boko Haram, the Christians have been unalived. So it seems to me that what they are claiming is that that Boko Haram is sort of like all the Muslims in Africa or in Nigeria are rallying around Boko Haram, with an intention to wipe out all the Christians. But that is not the case. That is not the case. It's far from the case. So this is very important, guys. Do not forget that these guys have been bleeding and milking Africa since time immemorial. Colonialism, slavery, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution and what they wanted from Africa, nothing has really changed in reality. What these guys want from us is our resources. What they want from us is it's our resources, basically. If you look at Europe today, they don't have anything anymore. And we are seeing real efforts by some countries in Africa to kick out the French. Another game they are playing again is democracy, rule of law, and all this bullshit. Yeah, I don't see them insisting on the rule of law with the Israelis pounding Gaza, because they say, well, Israel have an intention to root out terrorism. That Israel's intention is to push back Hamas, and they are doing that by bombing the entire population, bombing the entire infrastructure there, with an intention, quote unquote, by Israel to neutralize the militants. Even though the militants are hiding with it. But when it comes to Nigeria, the army cannot dare hit the terrorists, because if we do that, we are violating the human rights of the terrorists. And I'm going to play a video for you guys to listen to. And now this video is, about 5 minutes long. So it's about one of the contracting, because the Nigerian army as well, if you look at it as a whole, there are some elements within the army that have been bought over and corrupt by these international actors that have an intention to prolong the war, that have an intention to destroy the country. So if you don't have people that are patriotic enough to say, no, this is not acceptable, then it's going to be extremely difficult. So this is the situation we have found ourselves in Nigeria. So like I said, I'm going to show you guys the video. It's about 5 minutes long. And so you can see what really happened and the politics that is being played, by the way, because these contractors were brought in from the outside because the government of Jonathan at that time had enough. He couldn't trust the army anymore. There were, cases of, what is really going on. Is the army corrupt? Some of the contracts that they had to purchase weapons. We were not really seeing it. So it was an international scandal. So what Jonathan decided to do was to bring some of these guys from South Africa. And when he brought them, so the guy's name is Eben Barlow. I'm going to play the video for you guys to hear. So when they brought them from South Africa, they started having like success because these are mercenaries. These are private contractors. They are not legends to anybody. They don't really care. So when they came in, and this was a transitional period between when Jonathan lost the election and President Buhari came to power. Instructions came from the US to the newly elected president to stop attacking the terrorists. This is crazy. And by the way, the reason why people in the West don't understand this is because the media is deliberately silencing it. They don't want, they have no intention of allowing the people to know. And this is what is going on. So guys, I want you to watch the video. Watch the video and see what is going on in Nigeria. Let's listen to this.
Would you walk us through the Boko Haram offensive?
Boko Haram offensive was really not part of executive outcomes. That was STEP International that actually partook in that offensive. I need to first of all make it very clear that we were a subcontractor. There was a prime contractor appointed that appointed us as a subcontractor. Our initial aim was not Boko Haram per se, but it was to rescue the Chibok girls. They were the girls that had been kidnapped, and where the Western response was #SaveTheGirls. That type of nonsense does not save girls. Unfortunately, these girls became victims of a situation where the security had broken down in a specific area. They were kidnapped, and that was the first mission, rescue the Chibok girls. We then did a selection process of the Nigerian soldiers. The soldiers were retained after the selection process, were then trained in a very specific way to conduct a hostage rescue operation. And that requires a very specific type of person. However, approximately 5 or 6 weeks into the training of the hostage rescue team, we were asked to change our mission. And that mission was to go to a town called Maiduguri in northeast Nigeria that had come under severe threat of Boko Haram. We then rapidly had to transition what we were doing and suddenly train a very offensive force with a minimum of equipment. And we rushed to Maiduguri. We met with the 7th Infantry Division commander. We finally understood the pressures he was under, and our suggestion was to him that this force we had trained, which we named the 72nd Mobile Strike Force, would actually spearhead the division. And that is precisely what we did. The operation was in 3 phases. The first phase was to actually cut a dividing line across northeastern Nigeria and isolate Boko Haram into 2 defined areas, and then mop up one area in the south was the start, and after that was done, mop up in the north. The division would follow behind, occupy terrain. We would train the division in situ in defensive positions, etc., but we were never allowed to execute the entire operation. So in 1 month, we took back terrain larger than Belgium from Boko Haram. We were not allowed to finish because it came at a time when governments were in the process of changing. I think President Jonathan's government possibly saw the entire Boko Haram contract, if we call it that, almost as a last gasp in order to regain popularity. The incoming president, President Buhari, was heavily supported by a foreign government, and one of the first missions was to terminate our contract.
Could you name that foreign government?
Yes, we were told it was the United States, and they had actually funded President Buhari's campaign. The campaign manager for President Buhari came from the US, and I'm not saying that the United States is bad. I understand foreign interests, but I would have thought that a threat such as Boko Haram on the integrity of the state
Did you hear that?
ought to be actually a
It's not saying it's bad.
It wasn't.
Why do you think the US would intervene to abort such operation?
Again, I can't answer that. I think that the US can answer, but what I've come to realize that is when a government's foreign interests clash with the state's own domestic interests, conflict is bound to ensue. And those conflicts usually just continue with no end. And we can look at all the conflicts in Africa where foreign forces have come in, they've prolonged those conflicts, they haven't ended those conflicts. And the amount of money and manpower and equipment thrown at those conflicts says to me that something is wrong if no end result is achieved. And surely that end result should be to end the conflict and establish a basis for negotiations, come to an agreement, and then re-establish governance. But that's not what's happening in Africa.
How much did you charge the Nigerian government?
Well, first of all, we didn't charge the Nigerian government. And I think here that is a question the Nigerian government can answer. We were one subcontractor. So in other words, the Nigerian government appointed a contractor, and we contracted to that contractor as their subcontractor. So I think that's all I'll say. If you're really interested in the figures, that's for the Nigerian government to discuss.
So basically, this is Eben Barlow. They have a private military contracting firm in South Africa. Because the Nigerian army, there was a lot of complications, there was a lot of accusation and allegations about corruption, could not do the job. And it was a period leading up to election in 2015. So what the Nigerian government did at that time under Goodluck Jonathan was to bring in private military contractors from South Africa. And they took back, if you listen to him, he said, we took back an area larger than Belgium from Boko Haram. And then after the election, Jonathan lost the election. Buhari came to power and told them to abort the operation and to pack their bags and leave. And then why would you abort the operation? The instructions came from America that those guys were violating the human rights of Boko Haram. So instructions directly came from America. You guys can hear his name is Eben Balu. That there's a need to stop the operation because they are violating the human rights of the terrorists. This is exactly what the US is doing in Africa. And this is why we have to be extremely careful. No, this is not the first time, this is not the second time. We have seen this over and over again. And it's easy for some guy in Florida, sit down, smoke his weed, to think that he knows anything about Africa and say, oh, well, they're carrying out a genocide against the Christians. Well, the United States of America, the Congress testified to the hearing of the world that USAID, some money for the USAID was being channeled towards funding terror.
Not allowed to finish because it came at a time when governments were in the process of changing. I think President Jonathan's government possibly saw the entire Boko Haram contract, if we call it that, almost as a last gasp in order to regain popularity. The incoming president, President Buhari, was heavily supported by a foreign government, and one of the first missions was to terminate our contract.
Could you name that foreign government?
Yes, we were told it was the United States, and they had actually funded President Buhari's campaign. The campaign manager for President Buhari came from the US, and I'm not saying that the United States is bad. I understand foreign interests, but I would have thought that a threat such as Boko Haram on the integrity of the state of Nigeria ought to be actually a priority. It wasn't.
Why do you think the US would intervene to abort such operation?
Again, I can't answer that. I think that the US can answer, but what I've come to realize that is when a government's foreign interests clash with the state's own domestic interests, conflict is bound to ensue. And those conflicts usually just continue with no end. And we can look at all the conflicts in Africa where foreign forces have come in, they've prolonged those conflicts, they haven't ended those conflicts. And the amount of money and manpower and equipment thrown at those conflicts says to me that something is wrong if no end result is achieved. And surely that end result should be to end the conflict and establish a basis for negotiations, come to an agreement and then re-establish governance. But that's not what's happening in Africa.
How much did you charge the Nigerian government?
Well, first of all, we didn't charge the Nigerian government. And I think here that is a question the Nigerian government can answer. We were one subcontractor. So in other words, the Nigerian government appointed a contractor and we contracted to that contractor as their subcontractor. So I think that's all I'll say. If you're really interested in the figures, that's for the Nigerian government to discuss.
So basically, again, I'm playing this on loop. If you listen to the whole stuff, I kind of made it faster because of any flagging it for copyright and stuff like that. So basically, this is Eben Balu. He owns a military contract. And by the way, these guys have worked in Congo, they have worked in other places. These are private contracting firms that they take to conflict areas. And in some cases, they have like fantastic results. So they brought them to Nigeria. Goodluck Jonathan, the president at that time in 2013 or 14, brought them in. They had amazing and outstanding results. And after Jonathan lost the election in 2015, the new president, President Buhari, told them they have to pack their bags and leave. And this was in between, like in the middle of their contract. They canceled the contract and asked them to leave. Why? Instructions came from the United States. And if you listen to him, that's what he said. Instructions came from America. So why would the US intervene to abort such operation? Interest. What is the interest in supporting people you already call terrorists? These guys are terrorists. Everybody knows that. What is your interest in stopping an operation to root them out? Why? Gallium, tantalum, rare earth minerals in the Lake Chad area. This is what you're after. So again, some of you are like, I'm saying, cut me that crap. But I'm glad I'm going to go to the Northeast to report most of these things. Community to community and ask questions, what is really going on. I'll be going to some of the refugee camps. I'll be going to those places for you guys to see exactly what is going on in Nigeria. Enough is enough. And some of them sit down and write articles, the Washington Post, the New York Times, they have contacts with some people in government. But the reality is not being told. The reality is not being exposed for the world to see. In whose interest it is to keep this fighting going on. And if you listen to the whole interview with Eben Balu, he said, yes, the UN, whether it's the United States, some of these NGOs, how do they make their profits when anytime there's conflict? So, and if you listen to what the Chief of Defense Staff, General Musa, said in the forum in Dubai, I wish I can show you guys, play the video for you guys to see that I don't get some, violation or whatever, because I don't know how long I'll be able or allowed to play this video. I'll try to play it for you guys to see. So he was basically saying, in whose interest is it to prolong this conflict? In whose interest? We need to ask ourselves the question, whose interest is it to prolong this conflict? That some of these NGO guys will come and pay for accommodation in those areas, or close to the areas, like they'll go to Maiduguri, which is the capital city where the security situation is better, and pay for accommodation for 3 years. Now, why would you pay for 3 years? Is your intention to prolong the conflict for 3, 4, 5, 6 years? Some of them pay for expensive accommodations for 5 years. It's because they know very well that they want the conflict to go on.